Welcome to the Believe Fantasy Football Show. Lindsay and Fabs back with you with just over a week to go before the draft kicks off. And we finally have some landing spots for all of these prospects that we've been talking about for a really long time. Today, we are going to go through a fantasy wish list. Fabs has put together a list of 10 scenarios that he would like to see play out that aren't entirely out of left field. So they are doable-ish, Fabs?
I think most of them are very doable-ish. Yes,
Okay.
I think they're very doable-ish.
Okay. All right.
Is that a
Well,
word?
we'll discuss that. I'll tell you if
Okay.
I think that they're doable-ish as, you go through your list. Because I know I just wanted to just make that distinction because sometimes you're like, I don't care if it is really going to happen. This is what I want to happen for fantasy. So in this case, it's
These are all,
something that
yes.
you would like to see happen for fantasy purposes because it helps us in fantasy. These are like the ideal scenarios and landing spots for you, but they are also plausible things that could
Yes.
take place in the draft. We're
Very
not just like
viable.
putting
Correct.
Caleb on, a totally different team. Like he's going to Chicago. We understand that.
Yep.
This is an interesting time to do this kind of scenario because obviously we are getting into the heart of mock drafts. Like they're coming out fast and furious now, and like the big guns are coming out. Peter Schrager only does, I think he does 2 mock drafts a year. Waits till the last minute because his whole thing is to collect information. It's not that he's watching the tape and putting people where he thinks that they make sense. He's talking to general managers and head coaches and collecting sort of their impressions of the class and what they think that other teams are going to do. And so it's an information driven mock draft that came out today. Today is Tuesday. In it, Fabs, just to go through a few things that are out there before we get into your wish list, he has notably quarterbacks going 1 through 4 in his mock draft. He's got obviously Caleb at number 1. He's got Jaden Daniels at 2 to Washington, which I've been saying for weeks. I think that makes the most sense stylistically. He's got Drake May going 3 to New England, them staying put at 3. And then he's got New York, the Giants trading up to 4 from 6 to take JJ McCarthy. And it's a relatively costly move to move up those 2 spots. They give up a 3 in this hypothetical scenario from this year and a 2 next year. So obviously that pushes the elite wide receivers down. He's got Marvin Harrison Jr. going 5. He's got Arizona still getting an elite wide receiver at 6, even after trading out of 4. They get Rome Odunze. I think that would be a massive win for Arizona, that scenario. He's got Neighbors falling to 9 to Indianapolis, who he has trading up into that spot, which would mean that if Neighbors went to 9, that would mean that he was the third of the 3 elite wide receivers to come off the board. And there would be a handful of teams that would pass on him, who you could argue could do with a wide receiver. That would be Tennessee passing on him and taking Joe Alt, which makes sense. Then the Falcons passing on him for an edge rusher. That is Dallas Turner in this scenario. And then it would also have the Bears effectively passing on him too, because they'd be trading out of their pick. What would you make of that scenario? Like those 3 teams, and I know we hyper focus on fantasy, and it's hard to see a guy who could step on the field day 1 and be a wide receiver 1 that we actually want in fantasy. It's hard to see teams passing on that, right? Because like we want that in our world. Does that make sense to you though, from a real world standpoint, that scenario?
Well, I don't live in the real world. I live in the
Okay,
fantasy
sorry.
world,
Dumb
and I
question.
hate that. I don't
Okay.
want that to happen.
Okay.
I don't want the Colts to get a wide receiver. They've got Michael Pittman. Maybe Josh Downs takes the next step and becomes an even better player than he was as a rookie, when he showed some flashes but was inconsistent. The top 4 picks, that would be the first time in the history of the National Football League that 4 quarterbacks went with the 4 first picks. And I did a little bit of research. As you know, I love to look at trends. Went back to 2000, jumped in the DeLorean, got that sucker up to 88 miles per hour. Quarterbacks in the top 10, Lindsay, they have less than a 50% success rate from a fantasy perspective, which means that they're probably not going to have done well in a real football either, because typically putting up stats equates to success. Now, Troy Aikman is like one of the exceptions to the rule. Troy was not a statistical monster, but he won 3 Super Bowls. I miss those days so much. But 2 of the 4 quarterbacks, if you look at the trends, dating back to 2000, if you look at the trends, 2 of the 4 quarterbacks that are going to go in the top 4, 6, 8, whatever it's going to be, are going to fail. and JJ McCarthy is at the top of that list for me. I don't know why he's getting so much hype. I mean, he wasn't like a prolific passer in Michigan, and I know that's because they didn't run that type of offense. But listen, folks, it happens every single year. Don't believe the hype. There are going to be 2 quarterbacks in the top 10, and it looks like we will have 4 in the top 10 and maybe in the top 4 if Peter Schrager's correct. 2 of them are going to fail based on historical trends. They will. I think McCarthy's at the top of that list. I don't know why he's all of a sudden went from a late first round pick to top 4. And in some mocks, people have him top 3. Remember Mac Jones? Remember Trey Lance? Remember Zach Wilson? Let's go. You remember Joey Harrington? I don't know why NFL teams do this crap, but somebody is going to make a bad mistake like the Niners did. They got lucky because they landed Purdy with the last pick in the draft a few years ago. They got lucky. Imagine if they did not get Purdy. That would have set them back.
So
drafting Trey Lance and giving up that draft capital for him.
To that point, though, I think that quarterbacks, I mean, we all know why people are willing to take a risk on quarterback more so than other positions, right? Like, and there's always a bit of a risk in terms of the translation because the game in college is just so different from the NFL. And I feel like it's getting even more and more so. And the hashes change a lot of things in terms of evaluating these guys and what you see them do on Saturdays, whether or not that's even remotely similar to what you're going to ask them to do on Sundays. I think that there's a lot of complexities when it comes to evaluating film that you're seeing in college and then also transferring what you learned from that data into what you haven't seen them do, which is what they're going to be asked to do on Sundays. But also they're such a high value position. So if they hit, then you have what you need to go get a Super Bowl. 100%. But there's going to be a higher bust rate because you're also going to be more willing to take a risk at that position if you don't have that position already. So it all makes sense to me. I think there are different reasons when you rattle off the list of quarterbacks who have busted in the past. There are different reasons attached to each one. And I think JJ, I think what we're seeing, my read of his situation is that when people have gone back, backing up, what he did during the season didn't like draw your eye because the offense didn't run through him at Michigan. We all know that. He wasn't asked to do a ton of things. So I think that's why he originally wasn't one of those guys that they were like, man, that guy, get him early. He's one of those guys we're on early. I think one of the reasons that he specifically has come on later in the evaluation process is because when people go back and they look at the tape, they're like, man, he really did do everything he was asked to do very well. And so there's an element of the question in terms of like, how does this work on Sundays that you're doing to every single one of these prospects? In his case, you're like, but he did everything he was asked to do well. I don't see glaring weaknesses that pop off the tape and go, gosh, I'm really worried about that potentially translating and that has bust written all over it, that kind of stuff. And I think that's why he's going up because he feels safer. So if you've got like an offense and we can rattle off a few of these offenses in the league and San Francisco is one of them. They're not looking for a quarterback, but to the point about Purdy and what people always say about him is that he's not asked to do that much. The offense does it for him to a degree. And then he's just asked to execute, get the ball exactly where Shanahan wants it on time. Can you do that? And I think JJ McCarthy's tape suggests that he can do that. And so I think that's probably why he is skyrocketing up charts because for like a Kevin O'Connell or like a Sean McVay and like some of these different coaches, and I'm not, he's not being mocked to the Rams. I'm just using examples of coaches who drive the offense as opposed to the quarterback necessarily, that you could probably picture him being plugged into that type of offense and just executing it and not being asked to be like an all-world elite athlete, that not mattering. I think that's why.
Here's the problem. San Francisco's got elite talent everywhere on offense. If McCarthy goes to the Giants, good luck.
Correct.
Good luck. You could put me in the backfield for the Niners, and I bet you I wouldn't do terribly, except for just under 5'8" Italian short guy. Probably not going to throw the ball very accurately, but you get my drift.
Yep.
He got put into the driver's seat of a Ferrari, and McCarthy, if he goes to the Giants, will be put into the driver's seat of a Hyundai Sonata. and it ain't going to get better in year one. I just don't think JJ McCarthy is as good as everyone's leading you to believe. It happens every year, every single year. And I'll go back and look. I'm not going to use the top quarterbacks from last year because the guys had 1 year. Anthony Richardson only started 4 games. Stroud was great, and it looks like he's going to be a star, but it's 1 year. Baker Mayfield looked great as a rookie too, and we all know that did not pan out. But Trevor Lawrence, he's been a disappointment so far in the NFL. Zach Wilson sucked. Trey Lance started like how many games in the NFL before the Niners traded him? Like 6, something like that. And then you go to Tua. Tua's not been great in the NFL. I mean, like in terms of winning games, like fantasy's been okay, but in terms of winning games, been all right. He's not been great. Daniel Jones has sucked, except for 1 year. Baker Mayfield's been on 4 teams since 2021. Sam Darnold stink. Sorry, I know you love your Trojan. Josh Rosen was awful. I mean, some people would say he didn't have an opportunity because the offensive line and the Cardinals ended up drafting Kyler Murray the next year. I understand that. But, I mean, bottom line here is that Mitch Trubisky, like the Bears traded up to get him, and he stunk. It's going to happen. Mark my words. Hear me now, believe me later, whatever the saying is. There will be 2 of the 4 quarterbacks drafted in this top 8, top 10, top 4 who will not pan out and set back a franchise. I think McCarthy's at the top of that list.
Okay, so I'm interested to see the things that you. So I'm guessing one of your wish list items will not be McCarthy going to any specific team.
No, here it is. My wish list for McCarthy is to go to them.
The Giants? Oh,
Cowboys fan.
Selfishly, got it.
Suck.
Got it.
But yeah,
okay.
No, that's not a fantasy wish list.
Okay, so we won't tap that. Won't be. That's like a 10B. Okay, on your list of 10 things that we're actually going to talk about today. That'll be the one that we don't actually hit, but just was off the list. And by the way, I think that all this entire conversation that we've started with here will be a very interesting one to get Mike Renner's thoughts on. He'll be joining us. He's a draft analyst, and he'll be joining us on Thursday's show later on in the week, and have tons of questions for him about what he sees differently than, the consensus that's out there, maybe some of the ways that he's different. And also he'll give us some landing spots that would be particularly ideal for various players' skill sets that would make them more valuable to us in fantasy right out of the gate. Because obviously it's a fantasy podcast. And so that's ultimately what we're looking to learn here, is who's going to be good for us in fantasy and who we want to draft if whatever plays out in the draft. First, though, I want to remind you that BetOnline is your number one source for all your summer sports this season, from MLB, golf, NBA, and NHL playoff stats. All the latest stats, news, and scores available to follow your favorite team. So get the latest odds and lines, including the latest team matchups, player props, and odds on just about every sport out there. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to get in on the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Let's get to this wish list, Fabs. These are fantasy scenarios you would like to see happen. What is at the top of that list?
Well, I went in order of the draft. So at the top of the draft, you've got that quartet of quarterbacks that Peter Schrager believes will go 1, 2, 3, 4, and we'll see. But they're all going to go in the top 8, it seems. I'd like to see the Minnesota Vikings trade up and get Drake May, because I know you love Sam Darnold. I am not comfortable with Justin Jefferson. I'm sorry, with Justin Jefferson, with Jordan Addison, with TJ Hawkinson. I'm a little concerned about the quarterback situation there. I just am. And so if you get Drake May there, who's drawn comparisons to Josh Allen, doesn't mean that it's going to turn into the next Josh Allen. But the bottom line here is that if the Vikings trade up, they trade their 2 firsts in this draft, and then they trade a first next season, because it's going to be costly.
Oh my God.
You move up to
It
3,
will be.
Yeah, where the Patriots are sitting, and the Patriots are in rebuild. The Patriots need more than just a quarterback. If the Patriots get 2 1s in this draft and then another one next season, that's a lot of draft capital for them to rebuild. And this is not going to be a team that's going to the playoffs in 2024. It's a rebuilding franchise. So you put the Patriots in a better position to gain better picks and better players, and the Vikings move up, get their guy, and I would just feel more comfortable if you had someone like Drake May throwing the football to JJ, to Addison, and Hawkinson. And that's why I like this deal. It's a win-win. And the Patriots, they'll still have plenty of picks. They'll have 11 and 23, and they also would obviously get that first rounder in 2025.
I mean, I've said this over and over again. I think in this scenario, New England would have to be willing to move out. I agree with you that that's a lot of capital, but I don't see them doing it. But that's just my gut instinct, I guess. I do think it's going to require a lot for the Vikings to give up in order. And you just said that you'd be willing to do that in this scenario. My Partially because of the things that I just said about the Vikings offense, what I said earlier about how like a JJ McCarthy, I could see in that spot with Kevin O'Connell as more of somebody who is asked to just be a very, very good ball distributor, maybe. I think Drake May, you mentioned how some guys are going to bust. I'm not saying he's going to bust, but I think that there is a higher likelihood that he is, of those guys at the top, that he is a guy that could potentially do that. And I've said this before, some of the stuff that JT O'Sullivan has pointed out, and I think he's a very good, thorough evaluator just of the quarterback position. And he's not looking to, make headlines with his statements or anything like that, but he's just in his evaluation has consistently brought up concerns about the inconsistencies with his ball control, with his footwork, with some of just the basic things that would lead you to believe Drake May will do what you want him to do, even the easy things. I think that's maybe an undervalued thing that, like, in the Brock Purdy conversation, we're like, yeah, but he's not winning them games. Yeah, but he's doing everything. The easy things, like he does it all consistently and effectively and accurately. And I think that that's a concern that we have to attach to Drake May to a degree. He has those splash plays and they show up all over the place. And I think that alone makes his ceiling incredibly high, and someone's going to roll the dice on him for sure, because if they can get that other stuff fixed, then he could hit and be, arguably maybe the best quarterback to come out of this draft class. But if he doesn't get that other stuff fixed, like, that's concerning. If you have a guy, who's just a few feet away and you're throwing it at his feet, as we've seen on tape with Drake May. So
who some folks actually described similarly to what you were describing when he came out?
You're going to say Josh Allen? Yeah. But that's the issue. So that's why I'm saying I think somebody's going to roll the dice on Drake May. But to your earlier point about someone's going to bust, not everyone that has a similar profile to Josh Allen, problematically speaking, is going to be the outlier that Josh Allen has been. Josh Allen, I think, is an outlier. Most quarterbacks don't completely turn it around within a couple of years. And within the same offense with the same, you know what I mean? So I think that to a degree, we have to be wary. Like, on the one hand, you look at him and go, well, there's this example that's been set, and so maybe don't give up on them that quickly. But also that is a slippery slope, trying to project onto every quarterback the thing that this incredibly talented outlier managed to do. So he's the one that I'm a little bit more concerned about out of that group, just because I don't know that he's established that he can do all of the easy things consistently and well. He has that insane skill set where he can get the ball downfield and he can make those big plays. And you're certainly looking for that, especially if you have Justin Jefferson. But to me, that player is the one that I am more like that could potentially bust if he can't get that stuff worked out. Mm-hmm. Okay, so Drake May to the Minnesota Vikings is one that you like. Okay. How about hit me with some wide receivers that you want to go to?
And these are all very possible. Very possible.
Yeah.
The Arizona Cardinals, I want Marvin Harrison Jr. in that red and white uniform. Hollywood Brown is gone. They don't have a number one. He slots right in, and he will get a ton of targets in that offense. And that offense could be very fantasy friendly with Kyler Murray, Marvin Harrison Jr., Michael Wilson would have some late round sleeper appeal.
Yep.
Trey McBride, James Conner. I think they'll also draft a running back of the future at some point. among the 3 days on the NFL draft. But Harrison Jr. going to the Cardinals would solidify him, at least in my opinion, as a top 40 pick in redrafts. I think he could go in the third round, to be quite honest with you, in a 12-team league if he goes to Arizona.
Yeah, I love that move for sure. I'm
Mhm.
getting a little bit more on board, like the Schrager trade that I laid out for you at the beginning of the episode, where they moved down from 4 to 6. Like, if they're not moving down that far and they can still get one of those top 3 wide receivers, I mean, Marvin Harrison Jr. is one that we've all been in love with for a very long time and looks like he could be the best wide receiver in the league. He has that type of potential, but there are also a lot of positive things to say about Roma Dunze and Malik Neighbors, potentially checking that box as well. In all drafts, in fantasy drafts and in the real draft, I think you look at things in tiers. So if you are a front office in Arizona that believes that Marvin Harrison is his own tier, and then those other two are a tier. But if you don't believe that, if you think that they're a tier of 3 and you have the opportunity to trade back, pick up some capital, and still get one of those guys, I think that is probably for a team that needs a lot.
Mhm.
I think that that's probably the smartest approach to the draft. So I wouldn't be shocked to see them trade out of 4, only if they can trade back just a few spots. But I do love Marvin Harrison Jr. there, so I can get behind that wish list
Yep.
item. What is number 3?
Next one would be the Chargers getting Malik Neighbors and not
Hallelujah.
moving out of there, not going with, a Brock Bowers or someone like that, or an offensive lineman. Go with Neighbors because opportunity is king in fantasy football. And I am not a believer in Quentin Johnston. I think Josh Palmer's a fine wide receiver 3 in real football terms. They need somebody for Justin Herbert to throw the football to. And I understand that the offense of Greg Roman is not super conducive to wide receivers putting up big numbers, but the volume, in my opinion, would be great enough where Malik Neighbors would certainly be a potential wide receiver 2 from a fantasy perspective on a best case scenario basis. I don't ever think you're going to get like a high end 1 in a Greg Roman offense at wide receiver. I just don't think that. It's just not the system. Things could change. He's never had a quarterback like Justin Herbert before. But if you put Neighbors in that offense, he's going to be the volume guy. He'll be the guy who leads that team in targets. And I think it's a good fit.
Okay, this might be a dumb question. There might be a glaringly obvious answer. Has he ever had a wide receiver like Neighbors before? You said he hasn't had a quarterback like Herbert.
He's had Michael Crabtree. There haven't been a whole lot of great receivers in Roman's offenses, but I also feel like that's probably because based on the way the offense runs and the personnel that they acquired via free agency or the draft or trade over the years, they didn't look to have that superstar wide receiver because the offense just does not produce in the passing game, right? Lamar Jackson had a really good year under Greg Roman in terms of throwing touchdown passes. I believe he had 36, which was his first MVP year, but he threw for just over 3,000 yards. And we're talking about Justin Herbert here, right? I mean, like if Justin Herbert throws for 3,300 yards, we're going to be like, what in the hell?
Right.
That's terrible.
Yeah.
So I don't, I mean, Bolden was a very good fantasy wide receiver during his career, just not under Roman. Michael Crabtree had his moments too, but he was at best a wide receiver 2 when he was in Roman's offenses.
These Chargers, man, they're just gonna
look different. And one of my other wish lists items is going to have the Chargers involved. We'll talk about that in a bit.
Oh, okay. Looking forward to that. Let's find a landing spot for Roma Dunze though. We've already found homes for Malik Neighbors and Marvin Harrison Jr. Let's just round out the trio.
Yeah. Forget about the quarterback situation, Giants. I want a Dunze there. And much like Neighbors, volume is guaranteed. Giants have nothing, right? I mean, Wan'Dale Robinson, I mean, Jalen Hyatt, okay, maybe. I don't know that Jalen Hyatt's, a complete wide receiver who's gonna pop, but Roma Dunze could. I was watching our pal Daniel Jeremiah talk about him glowingly, about being the best wide receiver when it comes to contested catches, and could not say more good things about him. And the Giants haven't had an elite wide receiver since Odell Beckham Jr. went to Cleveland, so this would be a perfect fit. Odunze would dominate the targets. Now, would those targets be coming from Daniel Jones? Yeah, probably, yeah. Is that a best case scenario? No. But I'm also looking at this not only from a year 1 scenario, but also long term.
Right.
Daniel Jones ain't long-term as the quarterback of the New York Giants, in my opinion. So landing spot would be really good for Odunze if he ended up in the Big Apple.
And if you're worried about what happens to your draft capital up here and you're sitting in the 6th spot, maybe they can try and trade up to get a top quarterback. Maybe they don't at this point in this year's draft. At number 6, you're getting what, QB? Like if you don't move, you're getting QB. Well, and even if you do move, you're probably looking at QB 4, right? So do you want the 4th best quarterback in this class? How confident are you that that guy is absolutely your franchise guy for the future? What's the bust rate potentially attached to that? You don't have a bust rate attached to Rome. Or in general, I would say your bust rate is going to be much. You have a your margin for error, I think, is what is it, wider, smaller, whatever. Like you're going to hit more on the wide receiver than you are at the
Right.
quarterback,
Yeah.
right? So I think if you're looking at your 6th overall pick and you just need to nail it and you need to start building something, you need to walk away from this draft if you're the New York Giants and you need so many different things and you've just kind of blown it in a lot of different ways. You need to not blow it. And Rome Odunze feels like a safe, you're not going to blow it. He's your number 1 wide receiver. Barring injury or something that we can't predict, you have hit on that pick, and now let's go from there. I think that would be a smart approach. I like the spot. What's next?
Next up, we'll go down to number 12 in the Denver Broncos, where Brock Bowers would be perfect. He would be perfect there. They have Courtland Sutton. Your boy Marvin Mims is there. Obviously, Jerry Jeudy was traded to the Cleveland Browns. And Sean Payton has had success with tight ends in his offense. Jimmy Graham was among the elite tight ends in fantasy football during his salad days in New Orleans. He was right up there with Rob Gronkowski, if you remember. Jared Cook had one of his best seasons in New Orleans. Hell, even Ben Watson was a viable fantasy tight end in New Orleans during his short time there. You put Bowers in Denver's offense, and he's top 3 at worst in targets. And he's an immediate impact maker and a weapon, not only for Peyton and whoever the hell the quarterback's going to be in Denver. I don't know who that is going to be. But young quarterback, if it's not Stidham, if they end up getting someone else, Bo Nix or Penix or whoever it might be, tight end and a reliable tight end could be a young quarterback's best friend. Brock Bowers makes a lot of sense in Denver from a fantasy perspective.
Jared Cook. It's funny you bring that up from in terms of his early fantasy success in his career. Justin Herbert told me that he had Jared Cook on his fantasy team before he was in the league. And so he was so excited that he got to play with Jared Cook specifically when he got into the league. So, okay. So that's the tight end in the draft this year, Brock Bowers, Denver Broncos. Let me just ask one follow-up question about that. Is this the specific landing spot that you think is best for Brock Bowers? Like if you were looking to maximize Brock Bowers' fantasy potential, which is already probably pretty high based on the way that people are describing him, do you think that he maxes in Denver's offense, or do you think that this is in terms of like realistic options?
Well, all of this is realistic. I would rather see him in Denver than say with the Jets. Because the Jets are already loaded with weapons. I don't want that.
Okay.
And the quarterback may be there another couple of years. I don't know. So I'd rather have him go to a team that's going to end up getting some sort of new franchise quarterback, maybe this year, maybe in the future, very soon, and step in and be like, if he goes to the Jets, like you're behind Garrett Wilson, you're behind maybe Mike Williams, and Breece Hall's in the mix there too. So you're like maybe the 4th best option in the offense. We're in Denver. You could make an argument that he'd be the 2nd or 3rd at worst. So I just think Denver's a great spot for him.
All right. That's 5. We are halfway through this wish list of 10 fantasy scenarios. What's number 6?
I want to see T. Higgins get traded to the Bills. Now, T. Higgins has come out and said recently that he anticipates playing for the Bengals this upcoming year. I don't know how happy he is about it. But let's throw this scenario out there, Linz.
Okay.
Say now, obviously the Bills traded away Stephon Diggs. The draft capital that they received in that deal, they could use 2nd round pick in 2025, flip that pick to get T. Higgins. And then T. Higgins becomes a top 15 fantasy wide receiver at worst, top 12 with Josh Allen throwing him on the football. Giddy the hell up. I love it. And that helps Josh Allen's value as well. T. Higgins becomes an alpha, which I think he is in this league and can be. He's just been overshadowed by Jamar Chase. Now, this wish bleeds into another wish.
Okay.
And so if T. Higgins gets traded to the Bills, which improves his fantasy value by leaps and bounds, suddenly the Bengals need a number 2 wide receiver. So why not draft Brian Thomas Jr. out of LSU? Who else went to LSU? Jamar Chase. Who else went to LSU? Joe Burrow. Hello. Brian Thomas Jr. becomes the number 2 wide receiver in a super sick offense and would have fantasy value. You can see him emerging as a potential flex option in fantasy in Cincinnati. So this one here is kind of the 2 birds with 1 stone kind of scenario. Higgins goes to Buffalo, boom, big increase in fantasy value. Brian Thomas comes in, drafted by the Bengals. All of a sudden, it's like the LSU Tigers offense all over again, except for in the pros. Boom, big time potential. I know the ceiling would be limited because you've got Jamar Chase there, but that offense can support 2 good wide receivers, and I would suggest they can support an elite wide receiver in Chase and a good wide receiver, we're talking from a fantasy perspective, in Thomas.
Would you pick, if Ayuk was available, would you pick Higgins over Ayuk?
Well, I don't know that Ayuk is going to be available, but if you're saying if he is,
I mean, we don't know that about Higgins either, right?
I'd rather see Ayuk go to Buffalo if I had my choice than Higgins. Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
All right.
I would. But from a fantasy perspective, I don't know if it would be a better move because it depends on what the Niners are getting. The Niners are not, I don't know that the Niners are going to get a first round pick for Ayuk. I think it'd be more of like a second round pick and maybe an additional pick, something like that. I don't know if you're getting a first for Brandon Ayuk. I don't think you're getting a first for Higgins either. I think you're getting a 2 and something else. So if Ayuk was going to warrant a 1, then Buffalo would be giving up the 28th overall pick in round 1 to get Ayuk. And then the Niners would have 28 and 31. And maybe at that point, they drafted another wide receiver to replace him. Again, I don't know who, maybe, Lad McConkey. I mean, throw names out there who are going to be available late in round 1. I don't know if that scenario is as attractive to me as the one with Higgins going to Buffalo and then Thomas going to Cincinnati.
I realize that this is not a 1-for-1 because there are finances involved that make it harder to have a veteran that's very expensive on your roster than a first round wide receiver. But when you say that you don't think you would get a 1 for Ayuk or for T. Higgins, if you just look at some of the other wide receiver names that you're mentioning there later in round 1, wouldn't you rather have either of those guys than a Lad McConkey?
Who? In
Ayuk
particular?
or
One of the rookies
Higgins?
or
Ayuk or Higgins? Because you're saying I don't think you're
certainly.
going to get a 1 for them, and I just think that if you're looking at like a late first round pick and some of the wide receivers available, I think that
No,
would be a
absolutely.
smart trade to say, yeah, take this late one and I'll take Ayuk off your hands and pay him.
Absolutely. I'd rather have either one than any of the rookies, but also keep in mind that, and we always talk about this, how the rookies are going to be cheaper. Obviously, you're going to have them for 5 years, and you're not going to have to put up this big type of dough. But T. Higgins is going to warrant a big contract when he's eligible. Brandon Ayuk is going to warrant a big contract when he's eligible.
Like
I just
now,
don't know that. Right. Either way, you got to pay him. I just don't know that that Ayuk or Higgins is worth a 1. Now, maybe I'm wrong, but
do you think that they are number 1 wide receivers?
I think
if you plug them in, if you plug them into your offense, if you're one of these offenses that needs a wide receiver in this year's draft, and you plug Brandon Ayuk into that offense or T. Higgins into that offense, do you think that they are strong number 1 wide receivers? Are you confident?
From a fantasy perspective?
No,
I think,
in a real world football standpoint,
I do.
because then that great.
Yes,
so
yes.
I do too. So then I kind of think that we might be overvaluing the draft capital in that scenario in terms of the first round. But I'm getting into the splitting of the hairs of the
just for me, like right now when you're looking at it, could I see Ayuk being worth 28? That's almost a second round pick. Yeah, I mean, I guess first rounder there. It's a late first rounder, so I could see that. But then I don't want to fall into a scenario where like I'm trading a first round pick in the next year and boy, something happens and all of a sudden I have injuries on my roster and things happen and the team doesn't perform as well as it might have been projected to. And then all of a sudden you've given up like a top 15 pick to get Ayuk or Higgins. And I don't know if I want to go there.
No, I do agree with that assessment. I think you have to be careful with what one you're potentially trading in that scenario. Ayuk, by the way, since I just brought up that name, the New York Giants are a team that's come up a lot in like trade conversations surrounding him, and the New York Giants are also a team that's on your wish list, doing something totally different though.
Right, another Giant, because I mean, Giants have needs, man. Their offense is crap right now. So, and hell, we don't even know if Darren Waller's coming back. So they have the 47th pick in the second round. Go get a running back. Devin Singletary is a short-term answer. And I'd like to see him get Trey Benson. Now, this could also be Jonathan Brooks, but selfishly as a Cowboys fan, I want Jonathan Brooks. So I had the Giants getting Trey Benson. It could be Brooks, though. That could potentially be it. We've heard reports now that he's supposed to be cleared by July 1. So maybe Brooks is going to be the first running back off the board. And if the Giants so desire, they may grab him. But regardless, whoever goes to New York in year 1 will be in a committee with Singletary. But in year 2, you could see a breakout. You could see a guy who could potentially be very valuable from a fantasy perspective, because the Giants lost, obviously, Saquon Barkley to the Philadelphia Eagles. Is their offensive line any good? No. They've got work to do. But once again, we're talking about volume here. And while that volume might not be great in year 1, because I do think Singletary will get his touches because he does know the offense. He's worked with Dayball before in Buffalo. Future, moving forward, long-term, a guy like Benson could be pretty fun to watch in New York from a fantasy perspective.
So now that we're into the running back wish list portion of your top 10 moves you want to see made here, I do think that this is going to be a really interesting position in the draft, because I think that this is probably a position we've seen it happen in the NFL with the names that we know in the last few years. Different guys who have different strengths are just valued differently in different offenses and by different front offices. And this specific running back class, which doesn't have a Bijan Robinson type guy that everyone agrees is the best one in the class. I think that there is a lack of consensus about who the best running backs are. And I think that the running backs could come off the board in whatever order. I have heard different people talk about the different running backs in this class and be like, yeah, I know that everybody likes him, but I don't really see anything that special. I like this other guy instead. So I think that this could be like a throw them all up in the air and the cards come down in whatever order. It's like a certain, group of people that we're probably talking about in terms of the earliest running backs to come off, but I have no idea what order they're going to come off and where they're going to go. Speaking of, the Cowboys, like you mentioned, you were saving Jonathan Brooks because he's your favorite. So this is a little bit of a rigged wish.
Yeah, it is. And you make a good point too. Remember in 2020 in that draft when we all thought DeAndre Swift was clearly the number 1 running back in that class out of Georgia, and the Chiefs took Clyde Edwards-Helaire instead? We didn't see that coming. And that certainly didn't work out. But anyways, yeah, I want the Cowboys to get Jonathan Brooks. He went to Texas. He stays in the Lone Star State. As long as there's no setbacks, and it seems like he's looked good so far with the July 1 date in terms of being cleared. Now, he said that maybe his agents leaked it. I don't know, because they want to be as valuable as a commodity as possible to any NFL team that might be interested. But the Cowboys' backfield is fantasy gold, Linz. It almost always has been. Now, You had Emmitt Smith for a long, long time, who is the GOAT. Tony Dorsett before him, he was great. And then you had kind of a lousy, situation, like you had Troy Hambrick and guys like that who weren't very good. But then DeMarco Murray, an elite fantasy running back for a couple years in Dallas. He goes to Philadelphia. And then they have Joe Randall. I don't know if you remember Joe Randall, who was the starter the year after Murray left for Philadelphia. And then he played 6 games and he was a head case off the field and they cut him. But his numbers he was averaging like 12 or 13 points per game. Then Darren McFadden came in, and Darren McFadden wasn't in the prime of his career. He ended up finishing as the RB13 that year. And if you combine Randall and McFadden's numbers together, they have the RB2 that season. And then you had Zeke, of course. And then, you had Tony Pollard 2 years ago was the RB9. Last year was the RB14. That's the worst finish that a Cowboys running back has had from a fantasy perspective in a PPR league since before DeMarco Murray. So it doesn't matter who the coach is. It's just a trend. Cowboys running backs typically have done well.
Yeah.
And I think they're going to rebuild the offensive line through the draft. And if Brooks goes there, if it's Benson, whoever it is going to be a guy I'm targeting, not because I'm a Cowboys hawk. All right, maybe a little bit, but
Yeah.
just the trend in the scenario is very positive. Whoever ends up being the Cowboys starting running back next season.
Yep. Opportunity is there. It's all wide open and available for someone to come and take it.
Yep.
The same could be said about the Chargers.
That's right. And my last wish is Blake Corum, and this one's kind of easy. 3rd round pick to the Chargers. Why? Jim Harbaugh just won a national championship with this kid, and they love to run the football. Now, Blake Corum's not like a big guy, and I don't know that he would ultimately be like a featured back in the NFL. He'd probably end up sharing the workload, and by probably I say he would be sharing the workload with Gus Edwards in year 1. But think about the upside. Jim Harbaugh's not there for just 1 or 2 seasons. At least the Chargers and their fans hope not. He's going to be there for a while. You bring in Blake Corum, a young running back, to eventually be the starter. And, maybe it's a 65-35 split at some point in the future with another back, and in this case, Edwards. But that would be a great landing spot for Blake Corum. Who knows better than Jim Harbaugh how to utilize this kid? And Greg Roman loves to run the football, and the Chargers need a running back. They did get Gus Edwards. They need more. Eckler's gone. He's in Washington. They need more. They need depth. They don't have it right now. So if you draft Blake Corum and pair him with Gus Edwards, maybe in year 1 he's a flex starter and maybe he's inconsistent because Edwards gets the goal line. I get it. But moving forward, I think Blake Corum takes that job and runs with it literally and figuratively.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to have some conversations in a couple of weeks once the whole draft has played out. We know where all these running backs have ended up, and wide receivers too. I mean, all of these different offensive options for fantasy purposes, but running backs, we're going to have a totally start the conversation now about where we want to draft these guys. And it will be completely dependent upon where they go and how quickly we think that they'll see the field. Okay, so those are 10 fantasy scenarios that Michael Fabiano would like to see play out.
Is there one
list
or 2 on the list that you like more than others? Or Lindsay, do you have a couple of scenarios yourself that you want to see come to fruition?
Well, now, put me on the spot there. I mean, what if I just said no? How would that be for content? No,
then I would feel really horrible that none of my wish lists.
No, I mean, no, to the second part. To the second part. I've acknowledged the entire way that the ones that I am on board with more than others. I like the wide receiver landing spots. I do like that. And it's hard to really, I mean, as far as the top 3 wide receivers specifically, Rome Odunze, Malik Neighbors, Marvin Harrison Jr. I mean, I definitely want the Cardinals to walk with one. I think, and we've talked about the different ways in which they could go about doing that, but I think that they are really set up well to have a lot of maneuverability on draft day, but also walk with one of these top 3 wide receivers. And I would circle that as a priority for them, that I would like them to do. So I like your Arizona Cardinals drafting Marvin Harrison Jr., but then I would just also almost replace Marvin Harrison Jr. with top 3 wide receiver for me.
Yep,
I'm okay with any one of them going there.
You're right. Yep. No question about that. Yeah. Any of those 3 wide receivers going to any of those teams is a win.
I kind of feel the same way about the Chargers. I am on record and I've talked to you about this. I think that the Chargers have, for me, if you take Justin Herbert and you send him into a season with a wide receiver room without any high-end talent, and they are devoid of that. I mean, you're looking at one of the worst wide receiver rooms in the NFL as it's presently constructed. It's still a work in progress. I choose to believe that. And so I would very much like one of those guys to go there. And I see the value in maybe going offensive tackle or I can't personally get behind Bowers in that specific situation because I think that a high-end tight end is something that you add to a degree that's a luxury piece. Even though Brock Bowers is a pass catcher and he's elite and he's great at getting separation and the yards after the catch and all of that kind of stuff, which is what you would want your high-end wide receiver to be described as. I just think if you could have that, but also somebody who has the speed to get downfield quickly and stretch the field, why wouldn't you want the one who could do both? And so in this particular case where the Chargers desperately need a wide receiver. I don't want them to go in any other direction than that. Like so that's the one that I have. So I mean, if we're talking about wish lists, that's my number one wish, is that they don't leave Justin Herbert without a high end wide
That would
receiver
suck.
that can hit the
Yeah,
ground running.
right now he's not even my top 12 quarterbacks.
Right.
Not even
And
my top 12.
I mean, and
So, I
that says
mean,
a lot, right? From a fantasy standpoint of like how we see the offense, if we're downgrading people in fantasy based on the moves that you've made in the offseason. That doesn't mean you can't win with that, but it's just like, I don't know, man. Like, you've got this high-end quarterback. Like, give him some tools to do the things that we know that he can do well. Anyway,
yep.
so that would be my number one thing. There are a few. I think my wish list also is that there's a team that kind of upsets the draft in terms of what we're expecting to happen.
It's going to happen. I mean, there's no question it's going to
I
happen.
want
No
someone
question.
to enter the chat for the quarterbacks
Mhm.
specifically, because I think that that's really what would do it. Like if somebody moved up and you're like, oh my God, I thought they were going to take an edge, but they took a tackle. I'm shocked. Like that's
That's
not
not
exciting
right.
or sexy. I want someone who's not in this list of teams that we continue to talk about. We've talked about the Vikings moving up a lot. You know, I want someone to kind of come out of nowhere and just be like, guess what I'm going to do? Bam.
Yep.
That's one of my wishes.
And it will happen. Every year there's picks when you're like, what the hell? What? Or guys that drop CeeDee Lamb. I mean, geez Louise, like, the Cowboys stole him. He was a first round pick, but I mean, Henry Ruggs got drafted ahead of him, for crying out loud. So, if you remember, it happens all the time. DK Metcalf dropped big time, another wide receiver. Hell, Aaron Rodgers, way back when.
Yep.
Alex Smith was the number 1 overall pick out of Utah. Aaron Rodgers sat in the green room, and famously, people always remember that. And Rodgers used that as motivation. It happens all the time. Somebody's going to drop. Somebody's going to go higher than most people projected, whether it's at a position or overall. It happens all the time, and that's what makes the draft a lot of fun, especially, in the first few rounds. I got to be honest with you. Once you get past like round 5,
Yeah, I know you're
I'm
not.
on autopilot at that point. I'm like, all right, we'll just see if anybody fills a void. And then, like, you could talk about like, oh, Keyshawn Vaughn got drafted by the Buccaneers. They got
Yeah.
an opportunity. Maybe he's the guy, but at that point, we're looking at players that are probably not going to make the roster or barely make the roster. They may be playing special teams, so it's all about, really, it's all about the first three rounds. But from a fantasy standpoint, I mean, hell, Puka got drafted in round 5, right? I mean, so
Yep.
like, got to sneak that 5th round in there.
Yep. We'll have to revisit the offensive pieces that go in the later rounds and see just who has an opportunity to get on the field quickly and who might be a sneaky guy on the team that they ended up landing on. But I agree. If you live in the fantasy world and you're not a hardcore fan of a specific team, then it's really like the first 3 rounds, probably the first couple of days, where most of your guys are going to go. All right, that's going to do it for today's show. Thank you so much for listening to the Believe Fantasy Football Show presented by Bet Online. Quick reminder that coming up later in the week, we're going to have Mike Renner join us. He will go through the draft narratives that he doesn't agree with, maybe. Like, there are some things that I think we've all sort of landed on in this space that we think like a team A is likely to take, this type of position, maybe prioritize that. Maybe he doesn't see it that way. I'd like for him to kind of unspool some of those narratives if he wants to. Also, maybe what he thinks that might happen that could surprise us. And ideal landing spots, and this is the primary reason we're having him on, for draft prospects that will make them better sooner for us in fantasy. There are certain guys like, and you just brought up the name Puka, like Puka going to the Rams, automatically made him a more intriguing prospect to keep your eye on, right? Last year. So there are going to be people like that. And it's hard to predict this early, I think, but he's so specifically tied into what the skill sets are and what they do. Like if it's a wide receiver, that operates out of the slot and maybe their best route is this and they do this one thing or two things well. And if they end up on this team that likes to do that thing, then there'll be somebody that we need to have on our radar. I'd like him to kind of put some guys and some combinations on our radar at this point so that we can root for some scenarios
Can't wait.
next week in the draft. That's all coming up later on this week. In the meantime, like and subscribe, do all the things to help out the show if you feel so inclined. And you can find Fabs or me on the Twitter, the X, at
Yeah.
Michael_Fabiano and Lindsay_Rhodes. Hit us up with
You
things
always
that.
like hesitate to do your own. You got mine
Yeah.
down, but you always hesitate. You're like
So here's
Lindsay_Rhodes. Yeah,
right.
that's it.
That's because my
Your
Instagram is
Instagram is
different.
Lindsay Rhodes NFL.
Which,
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, like it. My Twitter handle was already taken on Instagram by the time I got an Instagram account up and
mine
running.
too.
So I had to come up with something different, and I always have to just hit pause real quick and say which one is this one. I have to picture it in my head because I'm a moron. Anyway,
You are
thanks,
not.
Babs. I'll
You
see
are
you again on
glorious.
Thursday.
All right.